Yo, what up YouTube? My name is Nishant. I'm a 7th grade science teacher. I teach here in the Inland Empire. And this video is a part of my Classroom Management Blueprint. This is part 3 of the Classroom Management Blueprint. This video is gonna be on your classroom systems. But before we talk about that, let's take you guys. I'm gonna take you guys with me. I know I should in this room. The first thing I wanna talk to you guys about is these 2 big ideas that'll kind of help you think about classroom management and systems in a different way. The first idea is the 80-20 principle, or the Pareto's principle. Now, this principle is probably the #1 thing that will help you as far as creating classroom systems that are really efficient, that'll really help you get what you want from your classroom. The 80-20 principle, or the Pareto principle, kind of goes like this. The idea is that there's about 20% of the things that you do in your classroom actually give you 80% of the results. So your job as a teacher is to try to figure out those 20% of those things and then execute really well on those 20% and then get rid of all the other stuff that you're doing, or like eliminate or reduce the other things that you're doing. If you can do this, you are able to be better with less effort, basically. And it's a lot of the times we get caught up with this idea of doing more and being busy and you know, feeling like we're a good teacher, and a lot of the times that trap makes you know, stay up late grading homework and like assigning a bunch of stuff like book work or a bunch of readings that don't actually matter, because it feels like if you do all these things you're actually being productive. But that's not the way it works. Only about 20% of the things that you do in your classroom actually give you the results towards your goals. So your job, first of all, is to figure out those 20%, and if you don't have really effective strategies or assignments or techniques, your job is to figure out I'm laughing because my cousin's filming this video and we're using a glide cam and his arms are shaking. That's why the camera's all moving like this. He needs to work out. Anyways, yeah, so those 20% of those things actually give you 80% of the results. So try to figure out those 20% of your classroom procedures and systems that actually give you those 20%, that give you those 80% of your results, and then maximize those and kind of eliminate the other things. So that's the first big idea. The second big idea that I think is super important when it comes to classroom management comes from Steve Jobs, and he's really famous for having this like reality distortion field. Basically, he would walk into a room and he would come up with these like crazy ideas. In the beginning, everyone would like hate on these ideas, but then at the end of the meeting, everyone would be like bought into the way he's like thinking about the world. And I think the way he kind of established or developed his reality distortion field was because of this one idea. And this one idea is about how he saw the world. Now, Steve Jobs saw the world as a system of systems. So like, and he said that every system that exists in the world as of right now was created by someone not as smart as you are.
Everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it, you can influence it, you can build your own things that other people can use.
Right? So he's saying that all the things that are in existence, the way how your school works, how your class works, how your students think, how your parents think, how the government feels about education, how the state feels about education, how the union, all these different things that exist in your classroom has already been invented by someone not as smart as you are, and someone who does not know your students like the way you know your students. So the key thing to remember using this idea is that you have to reinvent the things that already exist. Don't be lazy and just like use what's already there. It's better to like reinvent the thing in the systems, the things in your classroom, so they fit your students. Let's go on a walk because this is a pretty good day. I'm gonna tell you guys some more ideas about systems. So I'm gonna tell you guys a little story about Procrustes. Procrustes was he was a carpenter that lived in ancient Greece, and the story goes that he believed that his beds were like the most perfect creations on earth. And he was so proud of his beds that when because in ancient Greece, when people would go from one side of the country to the other side of the country, they had to stay in these little inns. And Procrustes, he opened up an inn because he wanted people to stay and experience what it's like to live in, like sleep in one of his like perfect beds, right? So what he did, every time someone would come over and sleep on his bed, if the person was too big for the bed, he would cut off their feet and his head so they would fit in the bed. If the person was too small to fit in the bed, he would stretch them at night until the person was like long enough to fit in the bed. And that kind of idea is similar to what a lot of us are doing in teaching, I think, because we have these ideals or things we read in books or things that we kind of think to be true, and we force that on our students. So our students are sometimes taller than we expect, sometimes they're shorter than we expect. If they're too tall, we cut their heads off. If they're too short, we try to stretch them into our bed, into our system. And that's exactly how you should not create a system. You should create a system where any type of students could fit in, and any type of student should be able to kind of to be integrated into your system. Creating systems for your classroom is choosing the right technology for your classroom. So when I was first starting teaching, I was like a huge proponent of using any technology that was like cool and flashy. But what I realized was, a few years ago, that it doesn't really matter what technology you have in your classroom. In my classroom, we have, like, every kid has a Chromebook, so there's a lot of options I have, but a lot of the time, the technology actually takes away from your lessons rather than like helping your lessons. So when you are choosing a piece of technology, like when you're choosing technology for your students, you want to make sure that it's like something that'll actually take you towards your goal rather than just like having this like fancy thing that you can. Important to kind of think about the 80-20 principle. Is this thing actually going to take you towards the goal that you have for your students, right? And if it doesn't, maybe that's not the right tech for you. And another thing is, like, a lot of the times you will get things pushed onto you by companies, right? Like, because they want you to use their technology, and they will try to say like this is the best app ever, or like this is going to help your students do this or that, or a bunch of other stuff. But a lot of the time, these software, these apps are not actually developed by teachers for teachers or for students. They're just a way for these companies to make money. And I hate to say it, but a lot of people that are teachers kind of get bought into evangelizing technology just because it's something that gives them kind of like an authority. Man, so I live in the desert, you guys, and it's like, look at the sun. It's pretty hot right now, so maybe we should go back home. What do you think? You want to go back home? All right, let's go back home. Yeah, I had to get out of that sun. It was really hot. All right, so the next thing I think that's super duper important for your systems in your classroom is figuring out like how to do grades. I think there's two things that's kind of important. The first thing is to not use grades as a mechanism to punish your students, right? So a lot of the time, teachers will use grades as a way of like punishing students' behavior. So if they don't do their homework, or if they don't come to class on time or participate, then their grade is affected by all those students' actions. And I think that's really not a good way to go about it, because in a classroom, you should really be focusing on students understanding the content, not whether or not they're doing their homework or whether or not they're participating in the class. That should not really affect the grade, right? So that's the first thing. I only grade assessments in my classroom, what the students actually learned in the classroom. That's the only thing that goes into the grade book. Other things like classwork and participation and tardies and all this other stuff, that doesn't affect my students' grades. And that's just to keep me honest in how I assess my students. The second thing that's kind of important is to get rid of this like standard curve that people use. So most people use like 90% to 100% is an A, 80% to 89% is a B, 70% to 79% is a C. All of that works. That's an okay system. I think there's better ways to do it. In my classroom, I make it so that it's really hard to get an A in my class. So like, to get an A, let me just show you. I'll just use this to kind of show you what this looks like, right? So I do my grades a little bit differently in my classroom. So I don't use a standard scale, which is like, 100 to 90, 90 to 80, then you go 70 to 60, and you have 60 to 50, and this is like A, B, C, D, and then anything below 50 is an F, right? In my class, that's not kind of how it works. If you want to get an A in my class, you got to get a 95% or higher. If you want to get a B, you want to get 80% or higher. If you want to get a C, you got to get at least 65%. If you want to get a D, that's above 50% is a D, and anything below 35% is an F. Now what this does is it makes it really tough for students to get A's, because you got to get A's on all of your tests, but it makes it okay for students to not do well on those tests either, because there's a lot of leniency here. So if you're not a good test taker, you can still get like a B or a C, even if you get a 60%, 65%. So that's kind of how I do grades. I guess it's like a different way to incentivize the students, because you'll have the way I used to grade, I had a lot of students either getting A's, and I had a lot of students fail in the classroom. So what I had to do was I had to figure out a way to, like, because my curve used to look like this. I had a lot of A's and a lot of F's, and no one really in the middle. So what I thought I should, what I did when I was grading this way was I would make my assignments easier to help these students, but then if I was helping these students making the test easier, I was actually hurting these students, because these students were actually kind of bored. They thought my class was too easy. But doing my system now, you have a lot of people with A's and B's and C's, and you have a few people with F's, and that's kind of what I want, and that kind of serves my goal as far as teaching my classroom, because I want to, my main objective is to make students love science, and letting them feel successful, letting them feel like they're pretty good at it, even if it's through this method. It's kind of cool. And another thing that this method allows me to do is it allows me to make really hard tests. So if you get an A in my classroom, it's like you really deserve it, because you really understand the concepts. And being kind of lenient on the scale kind of allows me to make those exams and tests pretty difficult. It makes them pretty challenging for my students. So it kind of keeps it kind of fair too, because I can have a few questions that a lot of students won't be able to answer unless they really study the material, and those are the only students that'll be able to get an A in the class by studying the material. All right, so that's how I do grade. So I think another thing that's super important that is a vital thing in my classroom is my rules. And a lot of times teachers make a mistake, I feel, it's that they come up with like a million rules. But the thing is, your students know your rules. Like, unless you're teaching like first or second grade, your students actually know what to do in a classroom. You don't really need like 100,000 rules to allow them to be successful in your classroom. You just need a few what I call constitutional rules. These are rules that could be used in lots of different situations. So in my classroom, there's 4 rules. First rule is Mr. Yu's the boss, so that's me. Second rule is be nice. Third rule, work hard. And rule number 4 is see rule number 1, right? So the first 2 are kind of like for fun. The other one just says work hard. The other one says be nice and courteous. And I can invoke those rules for any type of situation. So if I need my students to be courteous in the hallway, I just say rule number 2 is to be courteous in the hallway, be nice, right? If I want students to work hard during studying for a test, I just say rule number 1 is that you guys are always working hard, right? So these are just couple things that you can use to kind of help you establish your rules in the classroom without like overwhelming the students with having like a million rules. I think that's it for this video. This one was kind of like an experimental video. I tried to do a few different things that I was feeling that was outside my comfort zone, and hopefully I'll be able to do more videos like this as I get better and better at making YouTube videos. Alright guys, thanks a lot. I'll see you next time, and don't forget there's a playlist below of the classroom management system. You guys can check out the other stuff on the blueprint. The first one is on the psychology of teaching. This one is on systems. There's going to be another one on gamification, and the third one is on capturing and maintaining and using attention in your classroom. So I'll see you guys next time. Thanks a lot. Bye. And don't forget to subscribe. See ya.